Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Castle Rock Downtown Mobility Study. We're here tonight to talk about mobility issues in the downtown. I know parking is an issue for vehicles. We're not really here to talk about that. We do have a parking study that was done probably, finished up last year or the year before, and that is available online. We do have a handout there with the web address. If you want to see that parking study, you can go to our website and look at that. But we're really here to talk about continuing mobility, being able to move in the downtown. My name is Tom Reif. I work for the town of Castle Rock. I'm the transportation planner. Then I'll go ahead and turn it over to Troy here. He'll introduce himself as well as go ahead and go through the agenda. He's going to give us a little PowerPoint presentation, Transportation 101, talk about some of the exercises that we're going to be doing tonight as well. So Troy, go ahead, take it away.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Troy Russ. I am a practice builder at Kimley Horn and sort of focus on creating transportation systems for communities. And in this downtown mobility study, the objective of the mobility study is to identify short and long-term transportation improvements needed to serve the future growth and help to achieve the town's vision for downtown as an economically vibrant area without altering its unique small town charm. That's really the challenge of this effort, is how do we accommodate the future growth that we know is going on and outline short and long-term strategies to accomplish that. The objective, the study area that we're looking at, and our screen got a little squeezed, so downtown seems to be on a diet. So we go from Wolfensberger on the north, to I-25 on the west, to the rail line on the east, down basically to Plum Creek. We do study all the intersections that relate to getting on and off of the interchange or the interstate. We do have the county fairgrounds as a secondary study area for special events. So that's the area we're looking at. The city just completed a town-wide mobility study, and this is a subsequent study just really focused on downtown. The schedule that we're working on, we're hoping to have a final product delivered by the end of the year, right before the holiday season. Tonight, we're at our first meeting. This is the goal-setting exercise. We have been doing some work. We've been talking to major stakeholders, the fire, police, all the departments of the city, the Colorado Department of Transportation, the county, and some advocacy groups. We've done one-on-one meetings with them. Now we're doing our one-on-one community. And our goal is to outline what we call the measures of success, what we all agree are the objectives for this study. So when we create alternatives, we use these measures of success to grade those alternatives against. That's really the goal-setting exercise that we're doing right now. After the goal-setting exercise, we're really going to study the existing conditions. We've already collected a lot of the data. We're going to see how traffic is operating now, and with the projected growth, how it's going to operate 30 years from now with the current growth trends. We are looking at safety aspects, where all the crash ratings are, the anticipated future growth in the area, and really looking at those existing conditions. Then we're going to come back with solutions. We're going to work in a second workshop, identify a range of solutions together. We'll present all the data and hopefully outline some fixes that we all think Castle Rock can achieve. And then we'll be hopefully wrapping it up with a set of initial alternatives in early November, and then wrapping that up for the town council in December is sort of the goal of the effort. So tonight, what we want to understand are really your core values and what you like and dislike about downtown, and we'll start to set up sort of testing of what the community wants to achieve.
Yeah, the town finished up in 2017 the Transportation Master Plan, where we looked at transportation townwide, and we looked at all modes of transportation. So the goals in those studies were really to make sure, one, that we address congestion, we relieve congestion where we can, we provide a multimodal system that is safe for all types of users, whether they be driving, walking, or biking. So that's one of the big objectives of the townwide plan. But as Troy had mentioned, I don't have all of the specifics with me. That plan is available online, though, on the website. We can pull it up later on if you want to see more specific examples. But for now, the recommendation that came out of that study was a lot of those projects that we identified and a lot of those issues that we identified townwide don't really apply to downtown. Downtown is a very unique setup where we can't go in and do our traditional transportation improvements for congestion, widening intersections, adding turn lanes, building new roads, widening roads. We can't do that downtown. That would destroy that character of downtown. And so we said, well, we need to do a follow-up study. How do we then keep mobility downtown when we have heard congestion is a concern, as well as modes, or well, when I say multimodal, that means transportation for all types of transportation modes, whether it be bicycles, walking, or some folks have raised transit as well. So all of those types of things are on the table for the downtown, but we really need to focus on some of the challenges that downtown presents, and then what are some of the opportunities. And so we really want to capitalize on those opportunities as we move forward in this study.
So it's an important study that the downtown, or the town-wide study for the first, prior to this study, sort of treated the city equally. And for economic reasons, cost of land, available right-of-way, downtown can't be treated that way. And so they recognize town-wide, downtown needs to be different. And I'm going to go into all of those sort of assumptions going into this that help give you guidance. And there'll be plenty of times for questions. But what I'd like to do is hear from you on what we call the core values of this study. So you each have 3 Post-it notes, or you have Post-it notes on your table. You only get 3. That's a better way to put it, because I don't think we handed 3 out. There's a big Post-it note there. And what the objective of this effort is to use a single word or a short phrase to describe what you value most about downtown Castle Rock. This doesn't have to be transportation related, because you're going to quickly learn that transportation, land use, parks, recreation, economic development, they're all interrelated. So what we're asking you now is you get 3 core values of downtown, no more. You can do less, but no more than 3. And write those words down, 1 word per sheet or a very short phrase. And when you're done, I want you to go to that wall and stick them on that wall. And if you see someone that put up a similar word or phrase, just put yours directly underneath them. What I want to do is get you up to speed with the many aspects of what other downtowns in Colorado and throughout the country are dealing with. And this is simply meant to be background information to help inform everyone as we go forward. It's good to know what other cities are doing and sort of the best practices that are out there. We also have some basic transportation 101 that can empower you as we go forward throughout the study. And so I always like to show this objective, right? When you think of downtowns or communities or town-wide actions or any town action, their primary objective when you look at the town council is to create place, right? To create Castle Rock a great Castle Rock. And oftentimes we see land use arguments, growth, put residential hill, commercial there, arguing with transportation, right? And they're arguing, and when those two argue and don't work well together, the thing that suffers is place, on how the place actually works. And I just want to give you an example of how important land use and transportation working together are. So how many people have been to Savannah, Georgia? Right? It's one of the greatest cities in America. And so we're just going to give you a little bit of background on Savannah. And it's a real simple set of questions. What do we think makes Savannah, Savannah? Right? What are the unique features of Savannah that make it Savannah? So I got a series of questions that we'll ask. Is it the buildings and is it the land use, right? Like on River Street. If you've been on River Street, it's a glorious spot, Old Town Savannah. Is that what makes Savannah, Savannah? What do you guys think? The land uses? Partly. Is it the events? Has anyone been to St. Patrick's Day in Savannah? Yeah, it's kind of like Denver, but Savannah's a lot smaller. But the parade's probably the same. Are they the events, the special events in Savannah that make Savannah, Savannah? Right? Ambiance. Is it the people? Right? Is it the events make ambiance? You're absolutely right. Is it the people? right? The true essence of what makes Savannah, Savannah. Is it like the students at the Savannah College of Art and Design? Is it the old historic architecture? Or is it the squares and the streets that are so unique, right? And I'm going to make an argument that there's only one set of diagrams that I put in here that doesn't change. Everything else will change. People move on. So it's not the people that make Savannah, Savannah. They contribute mightily, but it's not it. Is it the architecture? Architecture changes. Buildings change. It takes longer than the people to change, but buildings change. It's actually the division of public and private. So when Oglethorpe laid out Savannah, he laid out the grids and the parks and the squares. And those will never change. And what I mean, they'll never be owned by the private sector. There'll be nuance. You'll have a curb here, you'll have on-street parking there. But in essence, the grid that it creates and the street network that it creates actually defines Savannah. And we call that infrastructure, the bone structure of the community. We know what this animal is, yet we've never seen it alive. Right? We can tell by its structure that it stood upright. It used its tail for ballast. We look at its jaw and its teeth, and we knew it eats meat. It was a carnivore. Yet we've never seen it alive. It's the same way you treat cities. When you look at cities, you look at their bone structure. Right? And it's the infrastructure and the utilities and the streets and the public right-of-ways that divide public and private that define a city, right? Because it's not just the street. Water, sewer system, stormwater, electric utility, phone service, they all come through the public right-of-way to serve the buildings. The paths, the on-street parking, where people circulate, the roadways themselves, how do you get to and from your house, define the city. The sidewalks, interacting, getting in and out of the building, define everything that we think creates the city, the landscaping, the architecture, and the people who occupy that architecture. That entire character and form was dictated by the infrastructure. We call that the street network or bone structure. And so together they make community. So as we look at transportation plans, we need to understand the role of the public right-of-way. It's not just cars. There's water, there's sewer, there's utilities, there's access to properties. It's not just a conduit for traffic. So let's look at the skeleton of cities, right? So we saw the T-Rex and the bone structure, right? So Savannah's on the left, and Oglethorpe's original plat, and Irvine, California is on the right, right? You can tell a lot about this city from a planning perspective by just looking at this diagram. I'm going to help you out a little bit what we're looking at. So looking at the street grid, in Savannah, here's the squares and the grids, here's Irvine. So when you have a limited street network, they only have 2 roads or 3 roads that go anywhere, those roads have to be bigger because they're the only roads in town. Yet you go into Savannah, all the roads are connected. The roads can be smaller. From a land use perspective, you can ask yourself a question, what land use over time will work on this corner? I dare say residential, office, retail, all the land uses will work there. Ask the same question about the end of this cul-de-sac. What land use will work there? Only one land use. Not being a judge, I'm just telling you what the street grid is telling you, right? No other use will work there but residential. So it becomes a challenge over time as building age, because we know buildings age and people move on, the fact that the street grid is not connected challenges not just circulation, but many other aspects of city building. And you can see these diagrams, you know from this diagram, those residential uses will always be residential, and they probably should be, right? And here in Savannah, we know Savannah has been around for a long time. Those buildings have reinvented themselves time and time again. So looking at South End, Charlotte, this is the South End district, original textiles during the 1800s. That neighborhood, is, unlike Savannah, has reinvented itself 3 or 4 times, not 8 or 9 times like Savannah. Carolina Pavilion, literally 4 miles down the street, the way it was laid out, really is only going to be one use. And to change it takes a big investment, right? To change this into a neighborhood or an office building complex, when a bigger, better retail comes, it's a lot harder than what South End has had to do 3 or 4 times already. It's changed itself effortlessly over time. From streets, when you have lots of streets and connected streets, You have lots of opportunities to put sidewalks, more people are distributing, and you see downtown Winter Park, Florida, literally 3 miles away on 1792, where the grid breaks down and the street networks break down. There's a lot more cars on that, so you have limited transportation choices. Similarly with architecture, when you have bigger, wider, faster roads, the buildings retreat from the street, right? They pull back. They put the parking in front. They're pulled back from the street. Yet when you're in a downtown, if you've ever been on Main Street in Davidson, this is the same use, right? They're both drugstores, yet this drugstore is invited to the street. And it's because of the speed, the scale, the parking of the street. Now think of downtown Castle Rock, right? This is why downtown Castle Rock is very different than the rest of Castle Rock. You have a connected street network in downtown. The original plat of Castle Rock is connected. A lot of what has developed over time outside of downtown is very different. And I wanted to show you Irvine versus Savannah, because that's what Castle Rock is dealing with internal to itself, right? And that's why the town has put 2 transportation studies out. So let's talk about transportation and land use. Now this is sort of the 101 aspects of this and transportation planning, right? So the staircase is a roadway capacity. Imagine this is our 2-lane road and we want to widen it to 4 lanes because our forecast says in 20 years we need a bigger road. So when we widen that road from 2 to 4 lane, we double the capacity and it's supposed to accommodate the demand, right? That's the theory. What we have found is a phenomenon called induced travel. And what induced travel is your willingness to travel 5 miles further to save 10 cents on toilet paper. Very hard to model from a traffic engineering perspective. Your willingness to relocate your house to drive further to qualify and suffer through the congestion or change your travel patterns, traffic engineers have not figured that out. And that's called induced travel. And so what we find oftentimes is when you widen that road, the forecasted demand is far less than the actual traffic on it. So when we see a road that's widened and it feels like it's just been congested up in 2 or 3 years, we've planned it to be free for 20 years. Yet induced travel has happened. And what we've learned over time is time and time again, that induced travel accelerates our need to accommodate because your behavior as a motorist changes with your ability to move around. And that's the phenomenon of Home Depot instead of the hardware store, right? The big Walmart instead of the corner grocery store, right? You're willing to travel further to save money because you can. And that's the phenomenon of called induced travel. But it gets to a point that it becomes very hard to improve the transportation network. Right? So this is a 6-lane road, and the land uses that want to be next to it are largely commercial, right? No one really wants to live next to that. And you can't improve that from a capacity perspective unless you start to grade separate intersections, right? That's all that can be the next step on this. Transit really wouldn't work in this corridor because the environment is not conducive to walking, right? So your partners in there are different. So that phenomenon of induced travel and how we forecast, you need to sort of be aware of. And that has had a consequence throughout the United States, right? So you probably know we have an obesity and depression epidemic among our kids, right? And it's from an inactive lifestyles. Now, transportation is not the only contributor to that, right? Diet and other factors, technology and others. But it's a contributing known source is how we design our cities is affecting the health of our children and ultimately the health of us. So the first-time generation, our kids aren't expected to outlive us. That's a significant thing to think about. Cost of living in Denver, right? These are all the costs that go into a household. These are national averages of what the costs are. Shelter, housing is the most expensive, right? 20% of the budget goes to shelter or housing. Guess what's number 2? So some of the most affordable housing strategies are actually investing in alternative strategies that lower this cost. That's something that's maybe more attainable than dealing with cost of housing, right? With the hot demand of being here. And then surprisingly, it's affected our cultural environment, right? So this says Our Lady of the Highways Catholic Church. I'm just trying to throw in a joke in there to keep you on your toes. So what are the principles of transportation that you need to be armed with to help us through this study, right? And so what we want to look at, instead of looking at just moving cars, and there's only two ways to do that, right? You do that through more pavement or more efficiency. More pavement's obvious. We make bigger roads, grade separations. More efficiency is system management, right? Roundabouts, one-way streets, squeezing as much capacity out of what we have, better signal timing. Those are really more efficient things. But there's other ways to deal with transportation. And I'm not saying we'd never do this. This is the primary objective, is still dealing with cars. But there's other ways to do it. How about moving people, not just cars, right? Investing in transit, bicycling, walking, HOV and hot lanes, high occupancy vehicle lanes, and other strategies. How about improving the quality of the trip? Hey, if it looks nice to sit in congestion, it's better than if it doesn't, right? What we're hearing for the first time is neighborhood traffic calming, context-sensitive design, personal security. All of these elements to make our trip better is really, transportation is now, it's a responsibility of the transportation planners. How about move less people, fewer miles? Right? What if people actually lived closer to where they work or closer to where they shop so they don't have to travel in the car at all? And we're seeing it in downtown Castle Rock, right? We're seeing these residential units come up. The average trip generation of those residential units are going to be less than the suburban areas of Castle Rock because they can walk around, ride their bike, they have more destinations that are simply closer to you. So that's what move fewer people, fewer miles. You do that through better roadway connectivity, mixtures of land use, walkable environments, compact development. That land use is maybe the most effective transportation strategy the town has available to it. And then lastly, manage, not solve. Right? And what we mean by this, traffic engineers grade streets, just like we grade our students in school, right? A to F, right? And F is bad, A is great. The reality is you'll never get A in Castle Rock, you'll never get B in Castle Rock, you'll never get C in Castle Rock, right? Level service D is pretty much the national average on what cities do to look at their levels of service. Now, a lot of other cities say, wow, with a stroke of a pen, we could go to level service E as a standard. Now, what I mean by a stroke of a pen, that's just a policy. Right? We say instead of level service D, let's go to level service E. That gives you 20% additional capacity on your road with a stroke of a pen. Now, why would communities do that, right? Maybe you can't maintain a level service D, right? Maybe that requires you to widen the street to take out a couple of homes that the community doesn't want to do, or a historic structure, or it's simply too expensive. And so that's where manage, not solve is, right? You change your levels of service. You change your community expectations. And a lot of times, the first and most important thing is to accommodate the vehicle. There's going to be a point that your choices are going to become really expensive from a fiscal perspective, or economic, or cultural, if you're hitting a park, if that's your choice. That you start to say, instead of maintaining that vehicle level of service, let's start grading how easy is it to walk around. How easy is it to ride your bike? How easy is it to take a bus, say, from Colorado Springs to Castle Rock to Denver, which that service exists today, right? So you do have transit in your community. And so that's what manage, not solve means. And so what we're looking at and communities are looking at all over the country is a full spectrum of solutions. It's not just about moving cars in downtowns. It's about so much more. And some basic 101 stuff for you. 2 two-lane streets carry more cars than a 4-lane street. Right? It's like, what are you saying? 2 carry more than 4. 2 of them. I'm not saying a 2-lane carries more than 4. So why is that, right? So this is a classic 1 lane in each direction, 2-way street. It carries about 600 cars per hour per lane. If we just introduce a left-hand turn, right? Get those pesky lefts out of the way. You can go from 600 to 800 to 900 cars per hour per lane. And it's those left-hand turns. If everyone made a right-hand turn, there'd be no traffic problems, right? But we have lefts. And so this is important to note. Look how much more efficient that is. But if you go to a 4-lane or a 5-lane or a 6-lane street, they're carrying more cars. I'm not saying they're not. They're just less efficient at it. So when you get to larger roads, we have to do a crazy thing called protected left-hand turns. And those are the red lefts, right? It stops everyone from making a left. And then the through movement, everyone has to wait for a couple of left-hand turns to make, and you're robbing your street of capacity, right? So it's important to note, do you have 2-lane streets in downtown Castle Rock? Or do you have 3-lane streets in downtown Castle Rock? Right? You have a very efficient, logical street network there. Now, 4-lane streets, 5-lane streets do carry more cars because this is cars per hour per lane, but they're just not as efficient. So this is why 2-lane roads carry more cars than a 4-lane road. And the next graphic is on the freeway, right? So this is how many cars per hour per lane you can move at a certain speed, right? So what's the most efficient speed you can move cars at? 25 to 30 miles an hour. That's when you're most comfortable with the gap between you. Now, if you're an adolescent, typically a male, influenced by hormones, this cart's off. But most people give a space between their car, right? Braking distance, 2 seconds, right? That gap is at its closest and most efficient at 30 miles an hour. When you go faster, that gap gets larger because as humans, we know we need that 2-second rule to brake in case the car in front of us. So you're actually processing more cars at 30 miles an hour than you are at 55 miles an hour. It's just an oddity of traffic engineering, right? So this is a freeway can carry, now it's the nose, we call it the nose job. It's actually stretching now beyond 2,000 cars per hour per lane on freeways, right? So this is free flow, not on signals. The last one was traffic signaled. All right, so what does speed matter, right? We know 30 miles an hour is pretty compatible with every land use, right? Residential, office, retail, they all work at 30 miles an hour. When you go to 60 miles an hour, residential doesn't work so well next to it, right? At 30 miles an hour, bikes, peds, cars, transit, they kind of all can get along. At 60 miles an hour, it's really hard, right? And so this is the facts. At 20 miles an hour, if you hit 100 people, you're going to kill 5. If you hit those same 100 people at 40 miles an hour, you're going to kill 85 of them. Speed matters from a safety perspective. That is the clear differentiator. And so these are facts. This is what is the likeliness of a human surviving a crash, right? You have a 5% chance of surviving, or I'm sorry, you have a 95% chance of surviving if a car hits you at 20 miles an hour. You only have a 15% chance of surviving if a car hits you at 40 miles an hour. So speed matters, especially in downtown environments, right? Downtown environments, we have pedestrians everywhere. We have cars turning all the time. This is why speed needs to be kept down in downtowns as you look at it. So that's sort of the basic background that arms you with traffic engineering. And so let's go to the land use side of it, because that's really the land use side of it. So the land use, real quickly, there's sort of conventional planning, and what I want to do is bore the people who get excited about land use by putting what we call trip assignments on there and traffic engineer it up, right? So when you have your retail, your park, your school, your homes, this is typically the travel pattern, right? You start your trip, you have your home-based work trip, you have your home-based shopping trip. This layout where cars are spread out or buildings are spread out forces you to link your trips or separate where vehicle is the predominant mode of travel. Yet in downtowns, in a walkable environment, you can see uses much closer together, right? Town hall, restaurants, residential, office buildings are much closer, so you could create a Park Once district. So this is why land use may be the most effective transportation strategy, is how you lay out your land uses, you cluster them or you spread them out, directly influences the transportation network, right? And we call it the trip generation factor, right? How do we do it? So if we have 3 separate destinations that are spread out, you're generating 6 trip ends. This is when you assign those trips through it, right? But if those same 3 destinations are within close proximity of one another, those 3 destinations are only generating 2 trip ends when you think in walking and bicycling as partners in the mobility network, right? So land use matters. And the design of land use matters. So if you're on this corner and you want your child to walk across the street to the park, you look at this and say, well, there is no door. they're going to have to walk a quarter mile around to this gate, cross, probably seldom people doing it. Or if there's a bus stop right there, what's the likeliness of someone walking? So without changing density, right, just watch the picture. I'm just rearranging the doors, adding some landscaping. I have not changed the density of this community at all. I just reoriented it. So now you can see little Susie can get out of the house, literally walk across the street to the park. You can imagine someone getting on a bus in this environment. So not only is it where the land uses are located, it's how those land uses address the street that matter, right? Because you can have the density right and totally blow it by the way you design the building, right? So this is a car-friendly and pedestrian-hostile environment, even though the densities suggest otherwise. Yet when you design it in a different way, you can suddenly see you can still drive, you can now walk and bike as partners. And so that's sort of how you look at land use transportation and the fundamentals of it. And the last thing I'm going to do is sort of do best practices in street design for downtown environments, right? So this is West Palm Beach, Crack USA. This is my first project that I worked on in City Place in West Palm. CBS News did a feature in 1998, and this title was Crack USA and was filmed in West Palm. So in a matter of 6 years, we did a downtown master plan for City Place and came up with the streets for pedestrians first. And this is now City Place, if you've been down to West Palm. It's no longer the crime capital of Florida. It's a very vibrant and successful thing. And what they did is they paid great attention and detail to the street design so the buildings felt invited to come to the street in terms of that investment. So that's sort of the basics of street design. In downtown environments, you really want to focus on best practices in pedestrian facilities. You have a lot of sidewalks, you have a lot of on-street parking, you need those sidewalks for the parking to work, right? You need to know what sidewalk components are. When you have the buildings, the first 1 to 3 feet adjacent to it, we call the shy. No one uses it, right? You're shying away from the building's edge. You're shying away from the fence. It's a very important space, but if you only have a 3-foot sidewalk next to a downtown building, you have basically no sidewalk. Because that's the shy, then you actually have the walkway or sidewalk. And this is the dimension you use for sort of the minimum sidewalk width is 5 feet. So in a downtown environment, you're talking 6 to 8 feet is necessary just to have a walkable sidewalk, right? And then you have the furnishing zone. Now in residential areas, that furnishing zone is often landscaped with grass or trees. In commercial areas, office, retail, that parkway or furnishing zone is important for street benches, street lights, so you can get out of your on-street parking. So that furnishing zone is an important partner. So just knowing the components of the sidewalk, and that also then shields the pedestrians from the moving traffic, right, from a design perspective. Corners. A lot of times, and Castle Rock does a good job on this. I wanted to show you this. This is what we call directional pedestrian crossings, right? It's the shortest distance for pedestrians. Oftentimes you'll see in more suburban areas what we call radial crossings, that the ADA ramp is on the corner and they cross up in here. That doesn't aim the wheelchair in the right direction. It doesn't put the pedestrian in the biggest, most important line of sight, where directional sidewalks do. In urban places where you have high pedestrian traffic, directional crossings are preferred from a safety perspective and a pedestrian accommodation perspective. Sidewalks and driveways, they always interact, right? So the best practice is have the sidewalk go through the driveway, not the other way around, right? Oftentimes you see the driveway actually go through the sidewalk. And so if you're running or you're pushing a cart, you have to go down and come back up when you're on the sidewalk. The best practices are you actually keep that level the best you can and make the 6-inch vertical difference up in the parkway. So when I'm a car, I come up those 6 inches and now I'm on the sidewalk. And again, that's a safety feature. It slows the vehicles down, but it also, more importantly, doesn't create tripping hazards for pedestrians as you're going through in this design. And then lastly, mid-block crossings. You have a couple of really good ones in downtown Castle Rock. There are different ways to design it, obviously, depending on traffic volumes and flow, alerting motorists to the crossings, either through signs or flashers. Having prominent medians to raise awareness to the motorists to slow down as they approach it, and actually extending the curb out so the pedestrians become more visible. It's not that your neighbors or your significant other hate pedestrians, because everyone said, oh, no one stops for pedestrians. We all drive. It's the design of our streets. You don't see the pedestrians, right? Oftentimes our sidewalks or crosswalks are too far from the cartway, so they're out of sight. And so what you think is a car not stopping for you being read, they can't see you. If we design the streets differently, having curb extensions, islands, where you're more prominent, you'll see them comply. You will see motorists comply and they yield to the pedestrians. It's just when you can't see them. And it's roadway design 101. In car-first environments, it doesn't make a lot of sense to create these environments. But in pedestrian-first environments like a downtown, it makes a lot of sense to this design feature to make pedestrians more prominent. Those are ped facilities, bike facilities, right? You have what we call cycle tracks. Cycle tracks are two-way bike paths adjacent to the road. Denver's taking a lane out on Broadway and putting a cycle track in from I-25 all the way into downtown, right? That's what we call a cycle track. Protected bike lanes, there's different versions. This is a buffered bike lane versus an actual protected bike lane. This is parking protected, landscaped protected. This is a one-way bike lane. Bike lane, what Denver has found, Denver has put in, I think, 30 miles of protected and buffered facilities in downtown. They saw bicycle ridership jump by 30%. So people are far more comfortable when they know they have that protection, to the likeliness of them getting on the road. Now, are these applicable to Castle Rock downtown? I don't know. We have a lot of competing users, right? We have sidewalk space, we have on-street parking, we have travel lanes, we have needed left turn lanes. There's other cities that are recognizing that, right? They create bike boulevards on low volume streets, and they use strange speed limits like 14 miles an hour, an interesting signing to do bike boulevards. But you think of Fort Collins, or you think of Longmont. Are those applicable to Castle Rock, right? These are their alleys. So what Longmont has done on both sides of 287 is they've upgraded their alleys. And so these are little wooners. Wooners is a Dutch term for shared space. And so you can actually see the UPS truck right behind this cyclist, right? So they actually share the utility of the alley with the cyclist. But they've designed it in such a way that it's designed for the pedestrian and the cyclist. So the cars come through slowly and yield. But both Fort Collins and Castle Rock didn't have the right-of-way to put the bike facilities on the street. Is that an option for Castle Rock? And then lastly, on bike facilities, this is a bike box. I don't know if you've ever seen it. If you've been to Rome and all those obnoxious scooters work their way to the front, and you as a motorist going, oh, what are they doing? It's the same principle, right? The smaller vehicle, when they're in front, the motorist sees them. And when you see them, you yield to them, or you comply and you let them go. So the bike box theory is at intersection where there's heavy turning movements, they actually push the car back so the cyclist can get in front of the car, and it's a safer environment so you see the cyclist. Because a lot of times cars will make a right, and not because they don't look right, they're only looking left when you make a right, they clip the bikes. And so bike boxes are designed specifically for safety so that the cyclists are seen. So that's the 101. That's the background. It's just general planning questions. I think you're armed now. I'd love to have a discussion on that. We could talk further. But I want to let Allison sort of summarize what we've seen in the values exercise.
We actually didn't have to do too much moving around. So what I have is just the final summary here and the top 5 values that you guys like most about downtown Castle Rock. And so I'm going to start with number 5. Walkable downtown area, and that goes along with a good trail access, trail network. Number 4 is a great community gathering place, new festival park, a sense of community, a place to have events. Number 3 is the downtown entertainment options, whether it's the dining, the eclectic shops, just walking around and spending time downtown, outdoor seating, that kind of thing. Number 2 is going to be the ease of mobility and accessibility. from a traffic standpoint, and there were some positives on the downtown parking as well in that category. And then the number one most valued element of downtown Castle Rock was historic character, friendly feel, old town charm, architectural elements.
Did that make sense? I mean, you put those together. Does that make sense of what is most important about Castle Rock? And should the transportation plan, I hear you like the mobility. I think a lot of it is the connected street network. You have a lot of choices to get in and out of downtown. So this is a great discussion that I want to advance through these exercises. Right? We could talk about this, but let's get this down on paper. All right, so what we're going to do is each table is going to go up to the jury stand. Kyle will take it, and if you don't mind just describing the biggest challenges your table identified.
Anyway, so some of the stuff we talked about was not consistent speed limits on South Perry Street where it changes. Sometimes areas that you wouldn't think it should change. Also Front Street where it's going up the hill and back. The sight lines downtown, some of the sight lines are terrible. Out here in front of PD is one at 2nd Street. It's really hard to get across the street there. 3rd and Perry, South and Wilcox. And then also 4th and Wilcox, trying to get across the street there with the cross traffic and stuff for the kind of the main ones.
Perfect, thank you.
We decided that some of the things we didn't particularly like was that area south of the library where it's all, we thought that the land use in that environment was very underutilized and very unappealing. So we thought that was a red mark. The highway ramp coming off of Wilcox down in,
I'm going to interrupt for a second.
Yes, sir. Oh.
You can hold that. So our
colleagues
colleagues on the internet can hear your great ideas.
We were not hip on the highway ramp coming off of Wilcox coming into town. Very unappealing, very uninviting, and dangerous with the dog leg and the mix and the mold of the 2 lanes. The railroad tracks. We all hate the railroad tracks, generally speaking. And one gentleman who is a long-term resident here was very unhappy about the roundabout. He thought that the roundabout was a waste of time.
One of the things that a number of us didn't like was these new Riverwalk buildings. We felt they were out of character and just added too much density to an area that's already struggling with a lot of density going on. So we were concerned about that. We also agreed about that land use around the that south area you were talking about. That's pretty ugly around there. We also agreed the Wilcox I-25 intersection was a great way to induce road rage in people. And that is not a very welcoming entrance to our downtown area there. 5th and Perry, there's just a lot of traffic in there. It'd be really nice to figure out a way to divert traffic, get it flowing around other arterials outside of that area there. Crossover from the fairgrounds to the south, what was that one?
South downtown crossover between the fairgrounds and the south. That's your overpass.
Oh, no, mine's a little bit further, Railroad Bridge. Okay, so the Plum Creek Railroad Bridge, the one that goes over the railroad bridge, I'm a biker, and that bridge is the scariest place for me to ride my bike on, almost in the downtown Castle Rock area, on Plum Creek there, because there's a path that terminates south of there. And to get out of that any place, you've got to go across Plum Creek, either up it or across it or something. And that railroad bridge, there's just no room for that there. Railroad does not belong downtown. As we discussed, that's going to take an act of God. But the 3rd Street roundabout, the roundabout in it, to some of us, some people loved it in our group. Others felt that circle was, the circle itself in the center was just too big and it just jammed up that area too much.
Thank you.
These are the 4 things that my husband and myself think are the worst spots on the roads in Castle Rock. And as you can see, with the first one, I've put I-25 on and off ramp, Wilcox and Wolfensberger. I don't mean the on-ramp going north, I mean the on-ramp going south to Colorado Springs. You come up to it, there's the traffic lights, directing the traffic lights going north, and then there's that curve going to go onto the on-ramp going south. The traffic, yeah, the traffic lights right there are coordinated with the traffic lights. Okay. Yeah.
We got it.
The traffic lights there, if you want to go to the south, the traffic lights there are coordinated with the traffic lights coming off the on-ramp. So you can get 2 lanes of traffic, one going onto the south and me going this way at the same time. And we've both got a green light. So that light needs to be changed. The other thing is when we live off 5th Street, we come down 5th Street, then we go onto that little kind of road up to the frontage road, and we hit Perry, and we hit Perry, and that merge, it's awful. They're coming up Perry Street, and you're merging, and you can't, traffic, you can't see. The other one is basically around, and it's been discussed before, the City Hall and 3rd Street. It has got loads of blind spots that you cannot see. And the other one is Front Street and the... Yes, and you don't like the railroad tracks. You don't like Perry and 5th. No. Okay. Again, because of the interchange and the railroad.
So for us, kind of overwhelmingly, it was the speed on Wilcox and Perry Street, how folks do treat it as a thoroughfare. We felt like it should be more inconvenient for people to use it as a thoroughfare, and that the speed limit should be a lot slower. We kind of felt like maybe, you know, when you tell people it's 25 miles an hour, you can expect them to go 35. So we kind of felt like if it was 15, then you would expect them to go 25, maybe, if we're lucky. We also felt that the intersections at 5th and Wilcox, when since there's a light there, when the light is yellow, people speed up and go through it, and it's dangerous for pedestrians, and the crosswalk signs aren't very big, so the motorists can't see them because they're small and old school. And then the intersection at 4th and Wilcox, it's a very busy intersection, and it doesn't have any type of pedestrian, push the button walk or anything like that. And then along with the stoplight at 5th and Wilcox, when they get the yellow, they're speeding through it, and then they can't slow down when there's somebody crossing there at 4th and Wilcox. And then, obviously, Castle Cafe's there, a lot of elderly people. Parking is an issue, so there are a lot of elderly people are eating fried chicken and going there and walking and going across the street. Speed's too high for the crosswalks again, and bicyclists. Both on Perry and Wilcox. It might be a good idea to have some sort of bike designated lane or something there. And then we have the 5th and Perry intersection, 5th and Wilcox intersection is confusing, and then Plum Creek intersection at Perry and Wilcox are both also confusing as well. So that's what we got.
And these are our top issues that we saw. Southbound Perry, coming down off the flyover, as you approach 5th Street, that tends to back up quite a bit, that stretch of roadway, so that sounds familiar with other folks' comments. We also, the westbound Plum Creek Parkway, as you're heading from the fairgrounds to the interstate, that tends to really back up, especially in the morning hours as people are trying to get on the interstate. That was a big concern for us. It sometimes went all the way past the railroad tracks. Just finding parking downtown, anywhere downtown is a difficult task. The roundabout, we didn't necessarily not like it, we just thought we need more education and instructing people how to use it better. Then we looked at the crosswalk at 8th and Wilcox. As you come off of the interstate on Wolfensberger, you're coming around the corner or you're speeding up to get on the interstate, that intersection is very difficult to walk across if you want to go to Crowfoot or to Dos Amigos there. So we thought that was a big safety concern. And then also we just thought, downtown just needed more bike racks, more places to park your bikes. Okay.
Are there repeats?
Yeah, we had southbound Perry 5th intersection, that was a repeat. And roundabout, that's, there's a lot of roundabout comments. So, removal, yeah.
All right, so you have 3 blue dots. And we'll give the table that use the bullets, you still get to use 3 dots each too. Because we know to discount your incredible organization. So if you don't mind taking your blue dots, your 3, and coming up here and voting on, if yours are the most important, put all 3 of them there. If you heard something new and you thought was equally important, put your dots in there. Spread them out. This is the last exercise and we can wrap it up.
Well, yeah, we would like to kind of wrap this up, so.
Thank you for coming tonight. The purpose of this exercise is, one, to record what everyone thinks is important, and we're going to look at all of them. But it's us listening and learning, but it's also you hearing what your colleagues and neighbors and fellow citizens of Castle Rock are thinking. And so it's a very deliberate exercise with the Post-it note that you go up and have to read other people's thoughts. Because in the Post-it note exercise, what could have been a wide variety of things actually consolidated. I think you all have the same core values, right? The core values are shown and we're going to record what we've heard. Similarly, these concerns, we're going to look at all of them, but the dominant ones up there are really for your education and ours. The Wolfensberger exit, or just the ramp itself, seems to be shining up there. The inconsistent speeds on the corridor, finding parking, we kind of expected that one. The sight lines, being able to negotiate downtown, those are some of the big point getters. We're going to look at all of those, but I really wanted you to hear it. And then lastly, go online. This isn't the only voice that we're going to listen to. We've done stakeholder meetings. We have an online survey going on. Go out there and answer it. Encourage your friends to answer it so we can start to get a bigger picture of what's going on. And I filled mine out and it's user-friendly. My 15-year-old must have done that, or someone capable from the town, one or the other. So thank you for coming out tonight. We're going to be taking this information and studying downtown through the summer. And we're going to get back together in September, early September, or actually August, to talk about what's next and how do we design. So we're going to present what the data says. We're going to present what we heard from you tonight, where they're aligned. I have a feeling most of them are going to be aligned. But there's going to be some one-offs that we're going to say, hey, there's a big crash history over here, and you just didn't think of it tonight. And then we'll have that conversation sort of middle to end of summer to lay out the strategies. So stay informed. If you signed in, you will get email notices from the town, and then we'll continue to reach out to you. Thank you so much for coming out.